The doors of the great hall slammed open before anyone could stop her, and every head in the room turned at once. Mira Ashwood stood in the frame of that doorway, with her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The hall was packed with pack members who had gathered for the evening meeting, and every single one of them was now staring at her, as if she had lost her mind. She probably had. At the far end of the hall, seated on a raised chair carved from dark wood, was Kane Rourke, the alpha of the Blackthorn pack. He did not rise. He did not even blink. He simply watched her with the same cold patience he used when he judged a dispute between two fighters, waiting to see what foolish thing she would say next. "I want to take the challenge," Mira said. Her voice did not shake, though everything inside her did. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then laughter broke out from somewhere near the back, quickly spreading through the crowd like fire jumping from one dry branch to the next. An elder named Doran, who sat near the alpha's chair, actually slapped his knee in amusement. "The healer's daughter," someone muttered. "Wants to take the challenge." Mira felt her cheeks burn, but she did not look away from Kane. She had come too far to be pushed back by laughter. Kane raised one hand, and the hall fell silent instantly. That was the kind of power he held. A single motion, and a room full of grown wolves obeyed without question. He studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes moving from her face to her hands, which she had clenched into fists at her sides without realizing it. "Do you understand what you are asking for?" he said. His voice was low, even, and carried easily across the stone hall. "Yes," Mira answered. "No, I do not think you do." Kane finally stood, and the movement alone made several people in the front row shift back, as if his size alone could push them. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of quiet stillness that made people nervous, even when he did nothing threatening at all. The challenge is not a game. It is not a test you can walk away from with your pride slightly bruised. Every Omega who has faced it has left broken in some way. Some never returned to this hall again. "I know what happened to them," Mira said. "I have tended their wounds myself. I know exactly what I am asking for." That seemed to catch him off guard, just slightly. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time since she had entered, he looked at her as though she were a person and not simply another interruption in his evening. "Then explain to me," he said, "why a woman who has spent years hiding in the shadows of this pack, who speaks to almost no one, who has never once tried to draw attention to herself, is suddenly standing in my hall demanding to be tested." Mira swallowed. She had rehearsed an answer on the walk over, something calm and measured, but standing here now, with every eye in the room fixed on her, the words came out simpler and more honest than she intended. "Because I need something from this pack, and there is no other way to get it." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Doran leaned forward with interest now instead of amusement. Even Kane tilted his head slightly, as if reconsidering something. "And what is it you need so badly?" he asked, "that you would risk your body and your name for it?" Mira hesitated only a second before answering. "My brother is sick. The medicine he needs comes from trade with the Eastern packs, and my family no longer has the standing to request it. If I earn a place through the challenge, even a place beside you that lasts only a single season, it will be enough to secure what he needs." The hall went quiet in a different way now. Pity, mixed with disbelief, passed among the crowd. Nobody expected an answer like that. Nobody expected the quiet healer's daughter to admit something so raw in front of the entire pack. Kane studied her a moment longer, his jaw tight, though whether from irritation or something else, Mira could not tell. "Your father was Aldrich Ashwood," he said finally. It was not a question. Mira's spine stiffened. Yes. The name meant something to the older members in the room. Aldrich Ashwood had once been the pack's most trusted healer, respected by everyone, until a mistake years ago had cost the pack dearly, and stripped his family of most of its standing overnight. Mira had grown up in the shadow of that mistake, watching doors close quietly wherever she went, watching people whisper her father's name like it was something shameful. "I remember him," Kane said, and something in his tone made it hard to know if the memory was a kind one or not. "That does not change my answer. The challenge is not offered out of pity, and it will not be adjusted because your reasons are sympathetic. If you step onto that ground, you step onto it exactly as every other Omega has, and I will not soften a single trial because of what you have told me tonight." I am not asking you to soften anything, Mira said. I am only asking for the chance. Kane looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. Then he turned to Doran, who was watching the exchange with sharp, curious eyes. Prepare the grounds, Kane said. The challenge begins in 3 days. A ripple of shock passed through the hall. Nobody had expected him to agree, least of all Mira herself, whose knees nearly buckled with relief and fear all at once. She had expected to be turned away, to be told to go home and forget this foolish idea. Instead, she had just set something into motion that she could not take back. As the crowd began to break apart, whispering among themselves, Mira turned to leave the hall as quickly as she had entered it. She did not want to stand there and be stared at any longer than necessary. But before she reached the door, a voice stopped her. You do know, Kane said, loud enough for her alone to hear over the noise of the dispersing crowd, that no one has ever finished all 3 trials. Mira turned back to face him. He had not moved from where he stood near his chair, watching her with an expression she could not quite place. Not mockery, not concern either. Something closer to curiosity, as if she were a puzzle he had not expected to find in his own hall. Then I suppose I will be the first, she said, and walked out before he could answer. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp against her face, and only once the heavy doors closed behind her did Mira allow herself to shake. Her hands trembled as she pressed them against the stone wall of the hall to steady herself. She had done it. She had actually done it. There was no walking back the words now, no quiet retreat into her old, invisible life. She thought of Colin, lying in the small back room of their home, his breathing shallow, his skin too pale, the fever that came and went no matter what herbs she tried. She thought of the empty jars on her shelf where medicine should have been, medicine that cost more than her family could trade for on their own. She thought of the years of small humiliations, the doors closed in her face, the whispers that followed her name wherever she went. 3 days. She had 3 days to prepare for something no woman in the history of the Blackthorn Pack had ever survived without being broken. She did not go home right away. Instead, she walked toward the edge of the training grounds, where the old wooden fence marked the boundary of the space, where fighters sparred, and where, in 3 days, she would stand before the entire pack and be tested in ways she could not fully imagine. She gripped the fence rail and stared out at the empty field, bathed in moonlight, trying to steady the storm inside her chest. A voice startled her from behind. You are either the bravest person I have ever met, or the most foolish. Mira turned to find Alara, one of the few people in the pack who had ever treated her with real kindness, standing a few steps away with her arms crossed, and an expression somewhere between worry and disbelief. Maybe both, Mira admitted. Alara stepped closer, lowering her voice even though no one else was near. Do you understand what you just walked into? The last Omega who tried this, left with a limp that never fully healed. The one before her did not speak for almost a month afterward. I know, Mira said quietly. I have treated both of them. Then why? Mira looked back out at the empty training field, the moonlight cutting long silver lines across the packed dirt. Because staying quiet has never gotten me anything. Because Colin does not have the luxury of me being careful anymore. Alara was silent for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice had softened. Then let me help you prepare. 3 days is not much, but it is not nothing either. For the first time since walking into that hall, Mira felt something other than fear settle over her. Not confidence, not yet, but the beginning of it. Back inside the hall, long after most of the crowd had scattered into the night, Kane remained standing near his chair, staring at the doors through which Mira had disappeared. Doran approached him slowly, his expression thoughtful. You surprised everyone tonight, Doran said. Including yourself, I think. Kane did not answer right away. He was replaying the conversation in his mind, the way she had not flinched, the way she had answered his questions plainly, instead of begging or making excuses. Every Omega who had come before her had either trembled through the entire exchange or tried too hard to appear fearless, and both approaches had told him the same thing, that they were not ready for what waited on the training grounds. Mira had done neither. She had simply told the truth and asked for a chance. She will not last through the first trial, Kane said finally, though the words felt less certain in his mouth than he intended them to sound. Perhaps, Doran said, or perhaps, you have finally met someone who does not know how to be anything other than exactly who she is. Kane said nothing to that. He turned and walked toward the doors leading out to the training grounds, needing the cold night air to clear the strange, unfamiliar feeling that had settled in his chest since the moment Mira Ashwood had walked into his hall and refused to be laughed away. 3 days. He told himself it was simply curiosity, nothing more, that made him already wonder how she would perform when the trials began. He told himself that many times, as he stood alone in the dark, staring out at the empty field where, in 3 days, everything about his ordered, predictable world was about to be tested right along with her. The 3 days before the challenge passed faster than Mira wanted them to, each one filled with a strange mixture of hope and dread that never fully let her rest. Elara kept her promise. Every morning before sunrise, she met Mira at the edge of the training grounds, when the fog still clung low to the grass and the rest of the pack was still asleep. They could not train openly. If word spread that Mira was preparing seriously for the challenge, it would take away the very thing that had always worked in her favor, being underestimated. "You are not strong like the fighters," Elara said on the first morning, circling Mira slowly across the damp grass. "So do not try to fight like them. You will lose that way every time." "Then how do I fight?" Mira asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "You do not fight. Not at first. You watch. You learn what a body is about to do before it does it, and then you use that half-second to protect yourself," Elara demonstrated, shifting her weight just slightly, before stepping into a strike, showing Mira the small warning signs that came before every movement. "You have spent years watching wounds happen, watching how people move when they are hurt or afraid. Use that. It is a different kind of strength than what they are used to seeing." Mira absorbed everything Elara showed her, replaying each lesson in her mind, long after their morning sessions ended. She had spent so many years as a healer studying the body from the outside, tending broken bones and torn skin, that she had never once considered how much of that knowledge could be turned toward protecting herself instead of repairing others. By the second day, something in her began to shift. She was still afraid. That fear never fully left her, but underneath it, a quiet determination had begun to take root. She was not simply walking into the challenge hoping to survive. She was beginning to believe she might actually understand it. On the evening of the second day, Mira returned home to find Colin sitting up in bed, weak but alert, his eyes following her as she entered the small room they shared with their mother. "You really did it," Colin said, his voice hoarse but carrying a note of disbelief. "You actually asked for the challenge." "I did." "Mira, you cannot." He tried to sit up further and immediately winced, pressing a hand against his side. "You cannot go through what happened to those other women. Not for me." "It is not only for you," Mira said, sitting on the edge of his bed and taking his hand gently. "It is for both of us. For this family. I am tired of watching doors close because of a mistake Father made before I was even old enough to understand what a mistake was." Colin's eyes glistened, though he blinked hard to keep the tears from falling. "If something happens to you—" "Nothing is going to happen to me," Mira said, with more confidence than she truly felt. "I have spent my whole life learning how bodies break. Now I am going to use that knowledge to make sure mine does not." Her mother, who had been standing quietly near the doorway listening, finally stepped forward. She looked older than her years, worn down by decades of quiet shame that had never truly been her burden to carry, yet she had carried it anyway. "Your father would be proud of you," she said softly. Frightened, certainly, but proud. Mira allowed herself a small, tired smile. It was the first time in years anyone in her family had spoken of her father without the weight of guilt attached to his name. On the morning of the third day, the entire pack gathered at the edge of the training grounds long before the sun had fully risen. Word had spread quickly through the pack that the healer's daughter intended to face the challenge, and curiosity had drawn out even those who rarely attended such events. Some came hoping to see her succeed. Many more came simply to witness what they assumed would be another swift and painful defeat. Mira stood at the edge of the field, wrapped in a simple gray cloak against the morning chill, watching as the crowd gathered along the wooden fence. Elara stood beside her, arms crossed, refusing to leave her side until the very last possible moment. "Remember what I taught you," Elara whispered. "Watch before you react. Let them think you are exactly what they expect, until the moment you are not." Mira nodded, though her throat was too tight to speak. Across the field, Kane emerged from the main hall, dressed simply in dark clothing, suited for the trials, rather than his usual formal attire. He walked with the same unhurried confidence he always carried, as though the outcome of the day had already been decided in his mind. When his eyes found Mira across the distance of the field, something flickered briefly in his expression, gone before she could name it. Doran stepped forward to address the crowd, his voice carrying easily across the open grounds. 3 trials. Endurance, truth, submission. Each trial tests something different, and each must be completed before the next may begin. If the challenger cannot continue, the challenge ends, and she returns to her place within the pack, no shame attached to the attempt. That last part was said out of formality more than truth. Mira had watched enough failed challenges over the years to know that shame followed every woman who did not complete it, whether the pack intended it to or not. The first trial begins now, Doran announced. Cain stepped onto the field, removing the outer layer of his clothing to reveal the lean, powerful build beneath, muscles built from years of leading and defending his pack. He did not look at the crowd. His attention was fixed entirely on Mira as she stepped forward to meet him at the center of the grounds. "Last chance to walk away," he said, low enough that only she could hear. "I am not walking away," Mira answered. Something in his eyes shifted again, that same flicker of curiosity from 3 nights ago returning, stronger this time. He gave a small nod, almost respectful, before stepping back to a proper distance. "The trial of endurance requires you to remain standing, facing me, for as long as I choose to test you," Cain said, loud enough now for the crowd to hear. "No striking, no running. Only standing and enduring whatever pressure I choose to place upon you." Mira understood immediately what this meant. It was not a physical fight in the way the crowd expected. It was a test of will, a slow and grinding pressure, meant to break a person's resolve rather than their body. Alphas carried a natural weight to their presence, an invisible force that pressed down on those beneath them in the pack hierarchy, and Cain's presence was among the strongest anyone had ever felt. 2 of the previous Omegas had collapsed under that pressure within minutes, unable to bear the sheer weight of his authority pressing against their instincts. Cain straightened, and immediately Mira felt it, a heavy, suffocating force settling over her shoulders, urging her body to bow, to kneel, to submit the way every instinct screamed she should. Around the field, several of the younger pack members who had never witnessed a true alpha's pressure gasped audibly, feeling the edges of it themselves even from a distance. Mira's knees wanted to buckle. Her instincts screamed at her to lower her eyes, to fold beneath the pressure the way her body had been shaped to do since birth. But she remembered Alara's words. "Watch. Understand what is happening before you react to it." She focused not on fighting the pressure, but on understanding it, the way she had learned to understand pain in her patients, breaking it into pieces small enough to manage, rather than letting it overwhelm her all at once. She let her knees bend only slightly, absorbing the pressure like a healer absorbing the weight of bad news, before delivering it calmly to a frightened family. She did not collapse. She bent and held. Whispers spread through the crowd as the seconds stretched into a full minute, then 2. Cain's brow furrowed slightly, the first sign of genuine surprise crossing his features. He increased the pressure, testing the limits of her resolve, and still Mira remained upright, breathing hard, sweat beating at her temples, but standing. 3 minutes passed. 4. The previous record, set by an Omega named Talia 2 years earlier, had been just under 3 minutes before she collapsed to her knees, sobbing from the pressure. Mira surpassed it, and kept standing. Cain's expression shifted from surprise to something more complicated, something that looked almost like respect, fighting against his own disbelief. He held the pressure at its peak for a long, grueling stretch, watching her carefully for any sign of weakness. Her legs trembled. Sweat ran freely down her face now, but her eyes never left his, and she never bowed. Finally, after nearly 7 full minutes, far longer than anyone in living memory had endured, Cain released the pressure all at once. Mira staggered, catching herself before she fell, gasping for breath as the crushing weight lifted from her shoulders. Silence held over the crowd for a long moment before it broke into a wave of stunned murmurs. Cain stared at her, breathing slightly harder himself, as though the effort of maintaining that pressure against her resistance had cost him more than he expected. "The first trial is complete," Doran announced, his voice carrying a note of genuine astonishment. The challenger endures. Mira straightened slowly, her legs still shaking beneath her, and met Kane's gaze across the space between them. Neither of them spoke, but something had shifted in the air, something the entire pack could feel, even if they could not name it. The quiet Omega everyone had dismissed had just done what no woman before her had ever managed to do, and the trial had only just begun. News of what happened on the training grounds spread through the Blackthorn pack faster than any wildfire could have moved through dry brush. By midday, nearly everyone had heard some version of the story, each retelling adding a little more disbelief to what the healer's quiet daughter had accomplished. Mira barely had time to catch her breath before Doran approached her at the edge of the field, his expression thoughtful as he studied her still trembling hands. "You should rest," he said. "The second trial does not begin until tomorrow morning." "I would like that," Mira admitted, her voice hoarse from the strain of the last hour. As she turned to leave the field, she caught sight of Kane standing near the far fence, speaking quietly with two of his senior fighters. He glanced up, and for a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance. He did not smile, did not offer any outward sign of what he was thinking, but something in his gaze lingered a beat longer than necessary before he turned back to his conversation. Alara caught up to Mira before she reached the edge of the grounds, practically bouncing with excitement. "You did it. 7 minutes, Mira. Do you understand what that means? Nobody has ever come close to that." "It does not mean anything yet," Mira said, though she could not fully suppress the small flicker of pride that warmed her chest. "There are 2 more trials, and I do not know what either of them involves." "The second trial is truth," Alara reminded her. "They will ask you questions in front of the entire pack, meant to embarrass you, to expose whatever weakness they think you are hiding. That one is not about strength. It is about whether you can stand there and not fall apart when they try to pick you apart with words instead of pressure." Mira's stomach tightened at the thought. Physical endurance she had prepared for in some fashion, through years of watching wounds and understanding pain. But this next trial felt different, more personal, more likely to reach into the parts of her life she had spent years trying to keep hidden from public view. That evening, as the sun set over the pack's territory, Mira sat alone near the small stream that ran behind her family's home, trying to steady her thoughts before the coming trial. The water moved calmly over smooth stones, and she found herself watching it for a long while, letting the sound clear some of the noise from her mind. A voice behind her broke the quiet. "I did not expect to find you out here alone." Mira turned, startled, to find Kane standing a short distance away, his hands clasped loosely behind his back. He had changed out of his training clothes into something simpler, and without the weight of his presence pressing down on her the way it had during the trial. He looked almost approachable, almost ordinary, despite everything she knew about him. "I needed somewhere quiet to think," Mira said carefully, unsure why he had sought her out, or what she was supposed to say to the man who had just spent an hour testing the very limits of her endurance. "May I sit?" he asked, which surprised her more than his sudden appearance had. She nodded, and he lowered himself onto the grass a respectful distance away, close enough to speak comfortably, but far enough that it did not feel improper. 7 minutes, he said after a moment of silence. "In all my years leading this pack, I have never seen anyone withstand that kind of pressure for so long. Even trained fighters struggle to hold their ground against it for more than a minute or 2. "I did not fight it," Mira said honestly. "I only tried to understand it, the way I try to understand pain when I treat a wound. Pain is easier to bear once you understand its shape." Kane studied her with an expression she could not quite read, something between curiosity and quiet reassessment. "That is a strange way to think about it." "Perhaps," Mira said, "but it worked." A faint, almost reluctant smile touched the corner of his mouth, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Tomorrow will be harder in a different way. The second trial does not test your body. It tests whether you can remain steady when everyone around you is trying to find the thread that will unravel you." "I know what the second trial requires," Mira said. "Alara explained it to me." "Then you also know that I will not go easy on you simply because you surprised everyone today." "I would not want you to," Mira said, meeting his eyes steadily. "If I earn a place in this pack, I want it to be because I truly earned it, not because you decided to make an exception for me." Something shifted again in his expression, that same flicker of respect she had noticed on the field earlier returning, stronger this time. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "Your father," he said carefully, "made a mistake many years ago that cost this pack a great deal. I remember the aftermath of it clearly, the arguments among the elders, the trade agreements that fell apart because of what happened. It left a mark on this pack that took years to heal." Mira's jaw tightened, old familiar shame rising in her chest, despite her best efforts to keep it buried. "I know what he did. I have lived with the consequences of it my entire life. That is not why I am telling you this," Kane said, his tone gentler than she expected. "I am telling you because tomorrow, they will use his name against you. They will try to make you feel small by reminding you of something you had no part in causing. I want you to be prepared for that, not because I wish to see you fail, but because I do not wish to see you fall apart over something that was never truly yours to carry." Mira stared at him, genuinely surprised by the warning. It was not what she expected from the same man who had pressed his full authority against her only hours earlier, testing her endurance without mercy. "Why does that matter to you?" she asked quietly. Kane was silent for a long moment, staring out at the stream rather than at her. "I am not entirely certain," he admitted finally, "but it does." Neither of them spoke for a while after that, the only sound the gentle rush of water over stones and the distant call of some night bird settling into the trees. Eventually, Kane rose to his feet, brushing off his clothing. "Rest tonight," he said. "You will need every bit of strength you have left for tomorrow." He left without another word, disappearing back toward the main hall, leaving Mira alone, with her thoughts and a strange, unfamiliar warmth she did not quite know what to do with. The following morning arrived gray and overcast, clouds hanging low over the pack's territory, as though the sky itself understood the weight of what was about to happen. The crowd that gathered at the training grounds was even larger than the day before, word of Mira's unexpected success having drawn out members of the pack who rarely bothered attending such events. Doran stood at the center of the field once more, a low wooden platform set up nearby, where Mira would stand to face her questioning. Kane stood near the platform, arms crossed, his expression carefully neutral despite the conversation they had shared the night before. "The second trial begins," Doran announced. "The challenger will answer whatever questions are put to her, honestly and without hesitation. Any attempt to deflect or refuse a question ends the trial immediately." Mira climbed onto the platform, her heart pounding, though she kept her expression as steady as she could manage. Around her, members of the pack began calling out questions, some genuinely curious, others clearly designed to wound. "Why did your father betray the trust of this pack?" one voice called out, harsh and unforgiving. Mira's chest tightened, but she remembered Kane's warning from the night before, and forced herself to answer calmly, rather than letting the old shame swallow her voice. "I do not know the full truth of what happened, because I was too young to understand it when it occurred. What I do know is that I have spent my life trying to be someone this pack could trust, regardless of what happened before I was old enough to have any part in it." A murmur passed through the crowd, some clearly satisfied by the honesty of her answer, others still hungry for something more painful to seize upon. "Is it true your family nearly starved last winter because no one would trade with you?" another voice called, cruder than the first. Mira's throat tightened, the memory of that winter, of watching her mother ration what little food they had, while Colin grew weaker by the day, rising sharp and painful in her mind. But she did not look away, did not let her voice waver. "Yes," she said simply, "it is true. We survived because I learned to forage in places others considered beneath them, and because I refused to let my brother go without, no matter what it cost me personally." The crowd fell quieter this time, something shifting in the air as her honesty continued to disarm the cruelty aimed at her. Kane, watching from beside the platform, said nothing, but his eyes remained fixed on her with an intensity that seemed to notice every word, every flicker of emotion crossing her face. More questions came, each one probing deeper into the parts of her life she had spent years hiding from public scrutiny. Each time, Mira answered without flinching, without excuses, laying her past bare in front of the entire pack, with a steadiness that slowly began to transform the mood of the crowd from hostility into something closer to reluctant admiration. By the time the trial ended, the sky had begun to clear, weak sunlight breaking through the clouds overhead. Doran raised a hand, silencing the last of the murmuring crowd. "The second trial is complete," he announced. his voice carrying genuine astonishment now. "The challenger has answered with truth and without falter." Mira stepped down from the platform on unsteady legs, emotionally drained in a way that felt different from the physical exhaustion of the day before. As she crossed the field, she caught Kane's eye once more, and this time, he did not look away quickly. He held her gaze with something that looked, unmistakably, like respect. One trial remained, and it would test something far more delicate than endurance or truth. Word of Mira's success in the second trial spread even faster than the first, and by the time evening fell over the pack's territory, her name was on the lips of nearly every member of the Blackthorn pack. Some spoke with admiration, impressed by her composure under pressure that would have broken many seasoned fighters. Others spoke with unease, uncomfortable at the idea that the quiet, overlooked healer's daughter might actually stand a chance at completing what no woman before her ever had. Among those who felt the most unease was Victor Lane, a beta with strong influence among the pack's trading council, and a long-standing ambition to see his own daughter, Priya, rise to a position of prominence within Kane's inner circle. Victor had spent months quietly positioning Priya as the obvious choice for any future mate the Alpha might consider, and Mira's sudden and unexpected success threatened to unravel all of that careful planning. "This is absurd," Victor said that evening, pacing the length of his private study, while Priya sat quietly in a chair near the window, watching her father's agitation with a carefully composed expression. "2 trials, and that girl has passed both. If she completes the third, Kane will have no choice but to acknowledge her properly." "Perhaps she has simply earned it," Priya said quietly, though there was an edge beneath her calm tone that suggested she was far from indifferent to the outcome. "Earned it?" Victor scoffed. "Her family's name has been a stain on this pack for years. The elders have long memories, Priya. If we remind them clearly enough of what her father cost this pack, they will not so easily accept her rise, no matter how many trials she survives." Priya said nothing, though her fingers tightened slightly around the fabric of her sleeve. "I want you to speak with some of the trading families tomorrow," Victor continued. "Remind them, gently, of course, of everything Aldrich Ashwood's mistake cost this pack. Let the memory work in our favor before the final trial even begins." "And if that does not stop her?" Priya asked. Victor's expression darkened. "Then we will find another way." Meanwhile, across the pack's territory, Mira sat with Colin in their small home, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders after the emotional toll of the second trial. Colin had insisted on sitting up to hear every detail of what had happened, his eyes wide with a mixture of pride and worry that mirrored their mother's own expression from the doorway. "You told them everything," Colin said softly, "about the winter, about the trading, about all of it." "I had no choice," Mira said. "The trial required honesty, and I would not disgrace myself by lying in front of the entire pack." "It could not have been easy," their mother said, settling into the chair beside Colin's bed. "Speaking about those things so openly, after all the years we spent trying to keep them quiet." "It was not easy," Mira admitted, "but it felt different than I expected. Saying it all out loud, in front of everyone, took away some of the power those memories held over me. I have spent so long being ashamed of things that were never truly my fault to carry." Her mother reached over and took her hand gently. "Your father would have been proud to hear you say that." Mira allowed herself a small, tired smile, though the thought of the final trial still loomed heavily over her mind, casting a shadow even over this rare moment of peace within her family. The following day passed quietly, the pack allowing a brief pause before the third and final trial, which Doran had announced would take place 2 days later, giving both Challenger and Alpha time to prepare for what all understood to be the most difficult trial of the 3. Mira used the time to rest her body, still sore from the endurance trial, while trying to steady her mind against the uncertainty of what the submission trial would actually require of her. Alara visited each morning, though even she seemed hesitant to explain too much about what awaited Mira on the final day. "I do not fully understand the details myself," Alara admitted, on the second morning of their quiet training sessions near the stream. "Submission trials vary, depending on the Alpha administering them. Some require public displays of deference. Others test something deeper, more personal." "What happened to the Omegas before me?" Mira asked. Alara hesitated before answering. Talia broke down completely during hers. Kane demanded a level of public submission that stripped away every bit of dignity she had left, and she could not bear it. The one before her simply refused partway through, unable to force herself through what was being asked. Mira's stomach tightened at the thought. "Do you think he will do the same to me?" "I do not know," Alara admitted honestly. "But I do not think you are the same as the women who came before you, and I do not think he has failed to notice that either." Mira thought of her conversation with Kane by the stream, the quiet warning he had given her before the second trial, the strange warmth in his voice when he asked why her family's shame mattered so much to him. She did not fully understand what any of it meant, but it gave her a small measure of hope that whatever the final trial required, it might not be delivered with the same cruelty the previous Omegas had faced. That evening, as Mira walked home from another quiet training session with Alara, she found Priya Lane waiting near the path leading to her family's home, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. "I wanted to speak with you," Priya said, "before tomorrow." Mira slowed her steps, uncertain of the other woman's intentions. She knew of Priya only distantly, aware of her father's ambitions, but having never spoken with her directly before. "About what?" "About what you are doing," Priya said. "Do you understand what will happen if you succeed? The position you would hold, the expectations that would come with it? This is not simply about proving yourself. It would change everything about your life, permanently." "I am aware of that," Mira said carefully. "Are you?" Priya's voice sharpened slightly. "Or are you only thinking about your brother's medicine, without considering what comes after you have it?" Mira studied the other woman for a long moment, sensing something beneath the surface of her words that went beyond simple concern. "Why does it matter to you what I am thinking?" Priya's composed expression cracked slightly before she caught herself, smoothing it back into careful neutrality. "It does not matter to me personally. I am simply saying that some paths, once started, cannot be undone. You should be certain of what you are truly asking for before the final trial begins." She turned and walked away before Mira could respond further, leaving her standing alone on the path with an uneasy feeling settling in her chest. She did not fully understand the meaning behind Priya's warning, but something about the exchange left her more unsettled than she had been before it. That night, sleep came slowly to Mira, her mind turning over everything that had happened in the past days, the trials already completed, the ones still waiting, the strange warmth she had felt in Kane's presence, and the uneasy warning Priya Lane had left her with. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, only that whatever it was, it would change something fundamental about her life, one way or another. Across the Pax territory, in his private chambers within the main hall, Kane sat awake long into the night as well, staring at nothing in particular, his mind similarly occupied with thoughts he could not quite untangle. He had presided over submission trials before, had watched women collapse under the weight of what he demanded of them, and had told himself each time that it was simply the necessary cost of proving worthiness within the Pack's oldest traditions. But tonight, thinking of the final trial waiting only 2 days away, he found himself troubled in a way he had not expected. Mira Ashwood had already proven something no one else had managed in all the years he had led this pack. She had endured his pressure, longer than any fighter twice her size. She had answered painful, personal questions in front of the entire pack without breaking. Whatever remained for the final trial, he found himself, for the first time, uncertain whether he wanted to test her the way tradition demanded, or whether some part of him had already begun to see her as something other than simply another challenger to be measured and dismissed. He did not have an answer to that question yet, but he knew, as the night stretched on and sleep continued to elude him, that the final trial would test more than simply Mira's resolve. It would test his as well. The morning of the final trial arrived with a stillness that felt different from the days before it. There was no fog, no gray clouds hanging low over the training grounds. The sky was clear and pale, the sun rising slowly over the distant hills as though even nature understood the weight of what was about to unfold. Mira woke before dawn, her body still carrying faint traces of soreness from the endurance trial, though the ache in her chest from the emotional weight of the second trial had settled into something steadier, something closer to resolve than fear. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake her mother, and made her way to Colin's bedside one final time before leaving. "You look calmer than I expected," Colin said softly, watching her from where he lay propped against a stack of pillows. "I do not feel calm," Mira admitted, "but I have decided that whatever happens today, I will face it the same way I faced the last 2 trials. Honestly, and without pretending to be someone I am not. Colin reached for her hand, his grip weaker than it used to be, but steady. Whatever happens, you have already done something no one expected. That matters, Mira, regardless of how today ends. She squeezed his hand gently before rising, gathering the last of her courage as she stepped out into the cool morning air. The training grounds were already crowded by the time she arrived, far more so than either previous trial had drawn. It seemed as though the entire pack had turned out to witness whatever the final trial would bring, drawn by the growing legend of the Quiet Omega, who had already accomplished the impossible twice over. Ilara found her near the edge of the field, expression tight with worry, despite her attempts to hide it. "Whatever he asks of you," she said quietly, "remember that submission is not the same as defeat. There is a difference between being broken and choosing to bend." Mira nodded, though she did not fully understand what Ilara meant until much later that morning. Kane emerged from the main hall dressed simply, his expression unreadable as he crossed the field toward the center where Doran waited. He did not look at Mira right away, and something in his careful avoidance of her gaze told her that whatever internal struggle he carried, it had not fully resolved itself even now. Doran raised his hands to quiet the murmuring crowd. The third and final trial begins. Submission. The challenger must yield fully to the Alpha's authority, before the entire pack, without hesitation or resistance. A heavy silence fell over the grounds. Mira had heard the stories, had tended to Talia after her own submission trial left her sobbing and unable to meet anyone's eyes for weeks afterward. She understood, in theory, what was being asked of her, but understanding it and standing here, moments away from experiencing it herself, felt entirely different. Kane finally turned to face her fully, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. The crowd waited, restless, expecting him to begin the same way he always had, pressing his authority forward until the challenger folded beneath it. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice so that only she could hear him. "You do not have to do this the way the others did." Mira looked up at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "Every submission before yours has been forced," Kane said quietly. "I have pressed my will against theirs, until they had no choice left but to yield, and called it a trial of worthiness, though it never felt like anything more than cruelty dressed in tradition. I do not wish to do that to you." "Then what would you have me do instead?" Mira asked. Kane hesitated, something vulnerable flickering across his usually composed features. "Choose it. If you are going to submit, let it be because you have decided to, not because I have crushed the choice out of you." Mira studied him for a long moment, understanding slowly dawning. This was not simply a shift in strategy. It was, in its own quiet way, an acknowledgement of everything she had already proven to him over the last 2 trials. He was not offering her an easier path. He was offering her the one thing none of the women before her had ever truly been given: agency within a trial designed to strip it away entirely. She stepped back slightly, drawing a steady breath, and then, deliberately, slowly, she lowered herself before him, not out of fear, not because pressure forced her knees to buckle, but because she chose to. She kept her eyes lifted to his the entire time, refusing to let the posture become the same hollow defeat the previous trials had demanded of other women. A stunned silence swept across the training grounds. No one had ever seen a submission performed this way, with the challenger's eyes still lifted, still steady, still entirely present rather than broken. Kane stared down at her, something raw and unguarded crossing his features before he could smooth it away. "Rise," he said softly, extending a hand toward her. Mira took it, allowing him to help her back to her feet, and for a moment, neither of them let go, the crowd around them fading into background noise as they stood facing one another, closer than either had been before. Doran cleared his throat loudly, breaking the strange, charged silence that had settled over the field. "The third trial is..." He paused, clearly uncertain how to categorize what he had just witnessed. "The third trial is complete. The challenger has submitted." The crowd erupted into a mixture of stunned murmuring and scattered applause, though the reaction was far from unanimous. Some clearly celebrated the outcome, moved by what they had witnessed. Others, including several of the older, more traditional elders standing near the edge of the field, exchanged uneasy glances, clearly troubled by how differently this final trial had unfolded, compared to everyone before it. Victor Lane stood among that latter group, his expression carefully composed, though his eyes betrayed a simmering frustration as he watched Kane still holding Mira's hand, a beat longer than protocol required. "This is not how the trials have ever been conducted," Victor said quietly to the elder standing beside him. "He has changed the very nature of the test to favor her." "Perhaps," the elder replied, "or perhaps he simply realized, as we all should have long ago, that cruelty was never truly necessary to prove worthiness." Victor said nothing further, though the tightness in his jaw suggested he was far from finished contesting the outcome of the day. Kane finally released Mira's hand and turned to address the gathered crowd, his voice carrying clearly across the field. "The challenger has completed all 3 trials. No woman before her has managed to do so. By the traditions of this pack, she has earned her place." A wave of reaction swept through the crowd, celebration mixing with lingering uncertainty among those who still clung to the old ways of thinking. Mira stood at the center of it all, breathless, overwhelmed, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, genuinely uncertain what her future now held. As the crowd began to disperse, Doran approached Kane quietly. "The elders will want to discuss this properly before anything is made official. Not everyone will accept the outcome as easily as the trial itself suggests they should." Kane's jaw tightened, though he nodded in acknowledgement. "Let them discuss it. Nothing about what happened here today will change simply because a few elders are uncomfortable with how it unfolded." He glanced back toward Mira, who was speaking quietly with Alara near the edge of the field, relief and exhaustion evident in every line of her posture. Something had shifted permanently within him over the course of these 3 trials, something he was only beginning to fully understand himself. Whatever objections the elders raised in the days ahead, he already knew, with a certainty that surprised him, that he had no intention of allowing this outcome to be quietly undone. The days following the final trial brought a strange new rhythm to Mira's life, one she had not fully prepared herself for, despite everything she had already endured to reach this point. Word of what had happened on the training grounds spread far beyond the Blackthorn Pack's own territory, carried by traders and travelers to neighboring packs, until the story of the Quiet Omega who completed all 3 trials had become something close to legend. But legend did not mean acceptance, not entirely, and Mira quickly discovered that surviving the challenge was only the beginning of a much longer and more complicated road. The pack elders called a formal meeting, 3 days after the final trial, gathering in the Great Hall to discuss what many were calling an unprecedented and troubling deviation from tradition. Mira was asked to attend, though she was given no seat among the elders themselves, made instead to stand near the edge of the room, while they debated her fate as though she were not present at all. "The trials exist for a reason," said an elder named Osric, his voice carrying the weight of decades of tradition behind it. "They are meant to test worthiness through hardship, not through whatever softened version Kane chose to offer this particular challenger. She endured the pressure trial longer than anyone in this pack's history," Doran countered. "She answered every painful question put to her in the truth trial, without flinching. Are we truly going to dismiss all of that, because the final trial did not unfold with the same cruelty we have grown accustomed to?" "Cruelty was never the point of the trials," Osric snapped. "Difficulty was. If the final trial can simply be reshaped based on the Alpha's personal feelings toward a challenger, then the entire tradition becomes meaningless." Mira stood quietly through the exchange, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, trying not to let the growing unease in her chest show on her face. She had not asked Kane to change anything about the final trial. She had not even fully understood what he intended, until the moment itself unfolded on the field. Yet here she was, being discussed as though she had somehow manipulated the outcome in her favor. Victor Lane, seated among the elders despite technically holding a lower rank than most in the room, seized the opportunity to speak. There is also the matter of her family's history to consider. Her father's mistake cost this pack dearly, and many of us have not forgotten the years of hardship that followed. Is it truly wise to elevate someone so closely tied to that legacy into a position of such importance? Mira felt her chest tighten, old shame threatening to rise again, though she forced herself to remain steady, remembering the lesson she had learned during the truth trial. She had already spoken openly about her father's mistake in front of the entire pack. She would not let it be used against her quietly now, in a room where she had no voice to defend herself. "May I speak?" she asked, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. Doran nodded toward her, though Osric's expression tightened with visible displeasure at the interruption. I did not ask for the final trial to be conducted the way it was, Mira said. I did not know, until the moment it happened, that Cain intended to offer me a choice, rather than force submission upon me. If that decision has caused concern among the elders, then perhaps the conversation should focus on whether the trials themselves need reconsideration, rather than questioning whether I somehow cheated an outcome I had no control over. And your father's legacy? Victor pressed, clearly unwilling to let that particular thread drop. My father's mistake was his own, Mira said, her voice sharpening slightly despite her effort to remain composed. I have carried the weight of it for years, through no fault of my own, and I have already spoken honestly about every hardship it caused my family, in front of this entire pack, during the truth trial. If that is not enough to satisfy the elders, then I do not know what more I am expected to offer. A tense silence followed her words, broken finally by Cain's voice from where he stood near the head of the hall, having remained largely silent through the elders' debate until now. The trials were designed generations ago, before I was even born, to test whether an Omega possessed the strength and character necessary to stand beside an Alpha, he said. Nowhere in that original intention does it state that cruelty is a requirement. I chose to offer Mira a choice during the final trial because I recognized, after everything she had already proven, that forcing her submission the way I had forced others would have accomplished nothing except perpetuating a tradition of unnecessary suffering. That is a significant departure from how these trials have always been conducted, Osric said stiffly. Perhaps it is time for a departure, Cain replied evenly. I will not apologize for choosing to test genuine strength, rather than simply measuring how much suffering someone is capable of enduring before they break entirely. The room fell into uneasy murmuring, the elders clearly divided on how to proceed. Doran finally raised a hand, calling for order. The challenger has completed the trials as they were presented to her, Doran said firmly. Whatever concerns individual elders may have about how the final trial unfolded, the outcome stands. Mira Ashwood has earned her place within this pack's highest standing, and no amount of continued debate will change the fact that she accomplished what no one before her ever managed. Victor's jaw tightened, clearly displeased with how the conversation had concluded, though he said nothing further as the meeting drew to a close. Mira caught Priya's eye briefly across the hall as the gathering dispersed, and something in the other woman's expression, tight and unreadable, left her feeling uneasy, despite the outcome of the meeting technically falling in her favor. Later that evening, as Mira walked home through the quiet paths of the pack's territory, Cain fell into step beside her, having clearly been waiting nearby for the meeting to end. That could have gone worse, he said. It still does not feel entirely settled, Mira admitted. Victor Lane seemed determined to find some reason to dismiss what happened, regardless of what the trials themselves proved. Victor has his own reasons for wanting a different outcome, Cain said, his tone carefully neutral. He has spent months positioning his daughter as the obvious choice for any future consideration on my part. Your success threatens that plan considerably. Mira absorbed this information quietly, pieces of Priya's strange warning from before the final trial beginning to fall into place. I did not realize the stakes were quite so personal for him. They rarely announce such things openly, Cain said, but I have led this pack long enough to recognize ambition when it wears the mask of concern for tradition. They walked in silence for a while longer, the evening air cool and quiet around them, before Mira finally spoke again. Why did you change the final trial? You never fully explained your reasoning, beyond saying you did not wish to force something out of me. Cain was quiet for a long moment, considering his answer carefully. Because somewhere between the first trial and the third, I stopped seeing you as simply another challenger to be tested and measured against tradition. I started seeing you as someone whose choices deserved to remain your own, rather than something I had the right to strip away simply because tradition demanded it. Mira's chest tightened at the honesty in his words, something warm and unfamiliar settling there in place of the anxiety that had lived there for so long. That is not something I expected to hear from you. It is not something I expected to feel, Cain admitted, until you walked into my hall 3 nights before the challenge began and refused to be laughed out of the room. They reached the path leading toward her family's home, and for a moment, neither of them moved to part ways, the silence between them comfortable, in a way that surprised them both. Whatever the elders decide going forward, Cain said finally, know that I do not regret the choice I made during the final trial. Regardless of what comes next, that choice was the right one. Mira offered him a small, tired smile before turning toward home, though the warmth of his words stayed with her long after he had disappeared back down the path toward the main hall. Little did either of them know that Victor Lane, having failed to sway the elders during the formal meeting, had already begun quietly plotting a far more dangerous approach to undoing everything Mira had accomplished. A week passed following the elders' contentious meeting, and slowly, the pack began to settle into an uneasy acceptance of Mira's new standing. She still lived in her family's modest home, still tended to the sick and injured as she always had, though now she did so with a growing awareness of the eyes that followed her wherever she went, some curious, some admiring, and a few still openly skeptical. Colin's health had improved considerably since the medicine arrived, traded through connections Kane had personally arranged with the Eastern Packs shortly after the trials concluded. Watching her brother regain color in his cheeks, watching him sit up and laugh again without the constant shadow of illness weighing him down, had made every moment of fear and exhaustion Mira endured during the challenge feel entirely worthwhile. But peace, she was quickly learning, rarely lasted long within the complicated politics of pack life. It began with whispers, small and easy to dismiss at first, suggesting that Mira's father's old mistake had been far more deliberate than the pack had ever realized. Mira caught fragments of the rumor while tending to patients, overheard hushed conversations that stopped abruptly whenever she entered a room, and felt the weight of suspicious glances growing heavier with each passing day. "Someone is spreading stories," Alara warned her one morning, arriving at Mira's home with a troubled expression. "Claims that your father did not simply make an error in judgment, but that he deliberately sabotaged a trade agreement for his own benefit, and that your family has been hiding stolen goods ever since." Mira's stomach dropped. "That is not true. My father made a mistake, a costly one, but he never stole anything. We have lived in poverty for years because of what happened, not in secret wealth." "I believe you," Alara said quickly, "but belief is not always enough to stop a rumor from spreading, especially one that conveniently paints you as unworthy of the position you have earned." Mira did not need to guess at the source of these new stories. The timing, so soon after the elders' meeting where Victor Lane had failed to overturn her success through official means, made his involvement almost certain. That afternoon, Mira sought out Kane directly, finding him in the training grounds overseeing a group of younger fighters. He excused himself immediately upon seeing her troubled expression, walking with her toward a quieter corner of the field. "There are new rumors spreading about my father," she said without preamble. "Claims that his mistake, all those years ago, was intentional theft, not simply an error. It is not true, but I fear the story is spreading faster than I can counter it." Kane's expression darkened immediately. "Victor Lane." "I cannot prove it," Mira admitted, "but the timing seems impossible to ignore." "I will speak with him," Kane said, his voice carrying a hard edge she had not heard, directed at anyone before. "That may only make things worse," Mira said quickly. "If you confront him without proof, it will look as though you are simply protecting me out of personal feeling, rather than genuine concern for the truth. It will give him exactly the argument he needs to claim favoritism has clouded your judgment." Kane's jaw tightened, clearly frustrated by the accuracy of her assessment. "Then what would you have me do instead?" "Let me handle it," Mira said. "I know how to find the truth of what actually happened all those years ago. My mother has old records my father kept, receipts and trade agreements from that time. If Victor is twisting the story, there should be evidence somewhere that proves the truth of what really occurred." Kane studied her for a long moment, before nodding slowly. "Then do what you need to do. But know that if you need support, or if this becomes more dangerous than simply clearing your family's name, I will not stand aside and watch it happen." Mira offered him a grateful smile, before turning to make her way home, determination replacing the anxiety that had gripped her since first hearing the new rumors that morning. That evening, she and her mother searched through the old trunk where her father's remaining papers had been stored for years, mostly untouched since his passing. Dust rose in small clouds as they sorted through faded documents, old trade receipts, and letters that had not been read in over a decade. "Here," her mother said finally, pulling out a bundle of papers, tied together with fraying string. "These are from the year everything happened. Your father kept careful records of every trade he oversaw, even after the mistake that cost him his standing." Mira sorted through the documents carefully, her healer's patience serving her well, as she pieced together the timeline of events from over a decade earlier. Slowly, A clearer picture began to emerge, one very different from the version of events Victor Lane had apparently been spreading through the pack. Her father had not stolen anything. The trade agreement that fell through had failed due to a miscalculation in the amount of goods promised to the Eastern Pack, an honest error that cost the Blackthorn Pack dearly in terms of trust and future trading relationships. It was a serious mistake, one that understandably damaged the Pack's standing for years afterward, but it was nothing close to the deliberate theft Victor was now implying. More troubling still, buried among the older documents, Mira found a receipt that made her breath catch entirely. It was a smaller trade record from that same period, one showing an additional shipment of goods that had been separately arranged, bearing a signature that was not her father's at all. It was Victor Lane's own signature, from a smaller side arrangement, that had never been properly reported to the Pack elders at the time. Mira stared at the document for a long moment, pieces slowly falling into place. Her father's mistake had been real, but it appeared he had not been the only one involved in questionable dealings during that period. Whether Victor had somehow contributed to the miscalculation that caused the larger trade failure, or whether he had simply taken advantage of the chaos afterward to arrange his own quiet, unreported dealings, the discovery meant that Victor Lane's hands were far from clean when it came to that period of the Pack's history. "This changes everything," her mother whispered, staring at the old signature with wide eyes. "It might," Mira said carefully, "or it might simply give me the leverage I need to make Victor stop spreading lies about our family, without needing to expose everything publicly." The following morning, Mira requested a private meeting with Victor Lane, careful to frame the request in a way that would not immediately alarm him. He agreed, likely assuming she intended to plead with him to stop the rumors, an assumption that made his expression shift rapidly, from smug confidence to visible unease, the moment she produced the old receipt bearing his signature. "Where did you find that?" he said quietly, all pretense of composure dropping away. "My father kept careful records," Mira said calmly. "It seems he was not the only one involved in questionable dealings during that period. I do not fully understand what this arrangement was, or whether it directly contributed to the trade failure that damaged this pack all those years ago. But I imagine the elders would find it very interesting to learn that the man now spreading stories about my father's dishonesty was quietly conducting his own unreported trades at the exact same time." Victor's face paled considerably. "This does not prove anything definitively." "Perhaps not," Mira agreed. "But it raises enough questions that I suspect you would rather this conversation remain between the two of us, rather than becoming public knowledge, alongside the rumors you have been spreading about my family." A long, tense silence stretched between them, before Victor finally spoke again, his voice tight, with barely controlled anger. "What do you want?" "I want the rumors to stop," Mira said simply. "Immediately. And completely. And I want you to accept that whatever personal ambitions you held for your daughter's future, they do not give you the right to fabricate lies about my family in order to protect them." Victor stared at her for a long moment, clearly weighing his options, before finally giving a stiff, reluctant nod. "The rumors will stop." "Good," Mira said, rising from her seat. "I have no interest in exposing whatever this old arrangement truly was, unless you give me reason to believe you have not kept your word." She left him sitting there, pale and clearly shaken, and made her way back through the Pack's territory, with a strange mixture of relief and unease settling over her. She had protected her family's name, at least for now, but something told her that Victor Lane would not simply accept this quiet defeat, without eventually attempting some new way to undermine her standing within the Pack. She was right to feel that unease, though she would not learn exactly how right until several days later, when Priya Lane arrived unannounced at her family's home, looking far more troubled than Mira had ever seen her before. Priya Lane stood at the threshold of Mira's home, her usual composed poise, entirely absent, replaced by something closer to genuine distress. Mira invited her inside cautiously, uncertain what to expect after everything that had unfolded between their families over the past week. "I need to speak with you," Priya said, glancing nervously toward the door, as though worried someone might have followed her. "About my father." Mira gestured toward a chair, and Priya sat, though she remained perched at its edge, clearly too agitated to settle fully. "He does not know I am here," Priya continued. "If he finds out, there will be consequences, but I could not stay silent any longer." "What is it?" Mira asked gently. "After you confronted him about the old trade receipt, He did not simply accept defeat the way he told you he would, Priya said, her voice trembling slightly. He has been meeting privately with two of the elders, who were most resistant to accepting your success in the trials. I overheard him planning something, though I do not know the full details. He intends to challenge the legitimacy of the trials themselves, arguing that Kane's decision to alter the final trial invalidates your entire claim to standing within the pack. Mira's chest tightened with the familiar weight of dread. Can he actually do that? The elders already ruled on this matter. There is an old provision, Priya said, rarely used, from generations ago, that allows a formal challenge to any alpha's judgment if enough elders agree that tradition has been improperly violated. If he gathers enough support, he could force a full council review, one that might strip you of everything you have earned, and could even weaken Kane's standing as alpha if the council rules that he acted improperly. Mira sat down slowly across from Priya, absorbing the weight of this new threat. Why are you telling me this? I thought you supported your father's ambitions for your own future. Priya's expression crumpled slightly, some of her careful composure finally breaking entirely. I never wanted any of this the way my father imagined it. He has spent years pushing me toward a future I never asked for, using me as a piece in his own ambitions, rather than considering what I actually wanted for myself. Watching you fight for something you genuinely believed in, something real, made me realize how empty everything my father has been planning truly is. What do you want instead? Mira asked quietly. I do not know yet, Priya admitted, but I know it is not this. I know I do not want to be part of destroying something you fought so hard to earn, simply because my father cannot accept a future that does not center around his own ambitions. Mira reached across the small space between them, resting a hand gently on Priya's arm. Thank you for telling me this. It could not have been easy. You should warn Kane, Priya said. The council review, if my father gathers enough support, could happen very quickly. Faster than you might expect. Mira thanked her again, before Priya slipped quietly out the door, disappearing back toward her family's home before her absence could be noticed. Mira wasted no time making her way toward the main hall, finding Kane in the midst of overseeing pack business with Doran. She relayed everything Priya had told her, watching Kane's expression harden with each new detail. An old provision, Doran said, frowning deeply as he considered the implications. I had nearly forgotten such a thing existed. It has not been invoked in generations, precisely because it carries such significant consequences for both Challenger and Alpha alike. Can he actually gather enough support? Mira asked. Possibly, Doran admitted. Osric was already resistant to accepting the outcome of your trials. If Victor has been quietly working to convince others as well, it may not take much more to force a formal review. Kane's expression remained tight, with barely contained frustration. Then we prepare for it directly, rather than waiting anxiously for Victor to make his move. How do we prepare for something like this? Mira asked. We gather our own support, Kane said. Elders who witness the trials firsthand, who can speak honestly about what actually occurred, rather than allowing Victor to control the narrative entirely on his own terms. Over the following 2 days, word spread quietly through trusted channels that Victor Lane intended to force a formal council review, challenging the legitimacy of Mira's success. The pack, already divided in its opinions since the trials concluded, grew increasingly tense as both sides began quietly rallying support ahead of what many now understood would be an unavoidable confrontation. Mira found herself unable to sleep properly during those 2 days, the weight of everything she had already endured now compounded by the fear that it could all be stripped away through political maneuvering rather than any genuine failure on her part. She spent hours with her mother going through her father's old records again, searching for anything else that might strengthen her position, while also spending time with Elara, who helped keep her steady through the mounting anxiety. Whatever happens, Elara reminded her during one of their quiet mornings together, you already proved something extraordinary. No council review can erase what you accomplished on that training field, regardless of how the politics unfold from here. It can erase my standing, though, Mira said quietly. It can erase everything that standing was meant to provide for my family. Elara had no easy answer for that particular fear, and the two women sat together in troubled silence, watching the sun rise over a pack that felt, for the first time since the trials concluded, dangerously close to fracturing entirely over the question of what Mira truly deserved. On the morning of the 3rd day, Word arrived that Victor Lane had successfully gathered enough support among the elders to formally invoke the old provision. A full council review would take place, that very afternoon, in the Great Hall, before the entire pack. Mira stood at the edge of her home that morning, staring out at the pack's territory bathed in early sunlight, trying to steady the storm of fear building steadily within her chest. She had survived pressure that broke seasoned fighters, had answered painful questions honestly in front of an entire crowd, had chosen submission on her own terms, rather than having it forced upon her. But this new challenge felt different, more dangerous in some ways than anything the physical trials had demanded of her, because this was a battle fought not with strength or endurance, but with words, politics, and the quiet manipulations of men like Victor Lane who had spent years learning how to bend a room to their will without ever raising a hand. She did not know, as she prepared to walk toward the Great Hall that afternoon, whether she possessed the same kind of strength needed to survive this particular battle. But she knew, with the same quiet determination that had carried her through every trial before it, that she intended to try. The Great Hall had never been so full. By the time the afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows along the eastern wall, every available space along the stone floor, and gathered around the outer edges of the room, was occupied by members of the Blackthorn pack, drawn by the significance of what was about to unfold. Mira stood near the front of the hall, Ilara at her side for support, while across the room, Victor Lane stood with quiet confidence, among a cluster of elders who had aligned themselves with his cause. Priya stood slightly apart from her father, her expression carefully neutral, though Mira caught the small, encouraging glance she offered, before the proceedings began. Cain took his place at the head of the hall, his expression composed but tense, aware of exactly how much was at stake for both himself and Mira in the hours ahead. Doran stood beside him, holding an old, weathered scroll that outlined the rarely used provision Victor intended to invoke. "This council has been convened," Doran announced, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded hall, "to review a formal challenge regarding the legitimacy of the recent trials completed by Mira Ashwood, and the conduct of Alpha Cain Rourke in administering the final trial." A tense murmur rippled through the crowd before settling into expectant silence. Victor stepped forward, addressing the gathered elders and pack members with practiced confidence. "The trials of this pack have existed for generations, designed specifically to test genuine strength and worthiness through difficulty. When our Alpha altered the nature of the final trial, offering a choice rather than demanding the submission tradition requires, he fundamentally changed what the trial was meant to measure. This is not a small deviation. It calls into question whether the entire outcome can be considered legitimate." Several elders nodded in agreement, though others, including Doran, remained visibly skeptical of the argument. "The purpose of the trials," Cain replied evenly, "has always been to determine whether an Omega possesses the character and strength necessary to stand beside an Alpha. Nothing in that purpose requires cruelty as the specific mechanism of measurement. I chose to offer Mira agency during the final trial because everything she had already demonstrated made clear that forcing submission upon her would have proven nothing beyond her ability to endure suffering, something she had already proven twice over in the previous trials." "That is your interpretation," Victor countered. "But tradition exists precisely because it removes personal interpretation from such important decisions. If every Alpha begins adjusting the trials based on their own feelings toward a particular challenger, the entire system loses its meaning." Osric, standing among the group of elders supporting Victor's challenge, spoke next. "There is also the matter of the challenger's family history to consider. Questions have been raised recently about the true nature of her father's past conduct." Mira felt her chest tighten, recognizing immediately where this line of questioning intended to lead. She stepped forward before Osric could continue further, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "I believe I understand where this argument is heading," she said, loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "And I would like to address it directly, rather than allowing rumors to continue circulating without proper context." Cain glanced at her with visible concern, uncertain what she intended to reveal, but he did not stop her from continuing.
"My father made a costly mistake many years ago,"
Mira said. "An honest miscalculation in a trade agreement that damaged this pack's standing and trading relationships for years afterward. I have never denied this, and I addressed it openly during my own truth trial in front of this very pack. Recently, Rumors have circulated suggesting his mistake was actually deliberate theft. These rumors are false, and I have documentation proving as much, records my father kept carefully throughout that entire period. She held up the bundle of papers she had brought with her, the same documents she and her mother had uncovered days earlier. What I did not expect to find among these records, she continued, her eyes moving deliberately toward Victor, was evidence that my father was not the only one conducting business during that troubled period. A separate, unreported trade arrangement exists among these papers, bearing a signature that does not belong to my father at all. A wave of shocked murmuring swept through the hall as Mira held the receipt aloft for Doran to examine. Victor's face had gone pale, his earlier confidence crumbling rapidly, as every eye in the hall turned toward him. I do not know the full details of what this arrangement actually was, Mira continued honestly. I have not sought to expose it publicly until now, hoping instead that the rumors against my family would simply stop on their own. But since Victor Lane has chosen to use my father's past against me, in this formal setting, I believe the pack deserves to understand the full picture, rather than only the portion that conveniently serves his current argument. Doran examined the document carefully, his expression grim as he confirmed the signature. This does appear to be your signature, Victor. Victor's jaw tightened, panic flickering briefly across his features before he attempted to recover his composure. That arrangement had nothing to do with the trade failure that damaged this pack. It was an entirely separate matter. Perhaps, Doran said evenly. But given that it went unreported for over a decade, and given that you have spent recent weeks spreading rumors questioning the honesty of another family's past conduct, the council will need to examine your own history with equal scrutiny before any further judgment regarding Mira's standing can be considered fair. The hall erupted into a fresh wave of murmuring, the momentum of the discussion shifting rapidly away from Victor's original challenge and toward growing questions about his own conduct. Priya, standing at the edge of the gathering, did not attempt to hide the small, relieved breath she released as her father's carefully constructed argument began collapsing around him. Kane raised a hand, calling for order, as the noise threatened to overwhelm the proceedings entirely. Once silence settled back over the hall, he addressed the gathered elders directly. I understand the concern regarding tradition, and I respect the importance of maintaining consistency in how this pack conducts its most significant trials, he said. But I will not allow a challenge built partially on false rumors, and now revealed to be motivated, at least in part, by personal ambition rather than genuine concern for tradition, to strip away something Mira Ashwood rightfully earned. He turned to address the crowd more broadly, his voice growing firmer with each word. Mira endured pressure longer than any challenger in this pack's recorded history. She answered painful truths about her past without flinching, in front of every person gathered in this hall. And when the final trial arrived, she chose submission freely, with dignity intact, rather than having it stripped from her by force. If that does not represent genuine strength and worthiness, then I do not know what our trials were ever truly meant to measure in the first place. A long silence followed his words, the hall holding its collective breath as the elders exchanged uncertain glances among themselves. Finally, Osric, who had stood firmly with Victor throughout the proceedings, spoke again, though his voice carried far less conviction than before. Perhaps, he said slowly, the challenge being raised today has revealed more about its source than about the legitimacy of the trials themselves. Doran nodded in agreement. I move that this formal challenge be dismissed, given the questionable motivations now revealed behind it. Mira Ashwood's standing within this pack remains fully legitimate and unchallenged. A chorus of agreement rose from the gathered elders, the momentum having shifted decisively in Mira's favor. Victor stood silently amid the growing consensus against him, his earlier confidence entirely gone, replaced by the sinking realization that his attempt to undo Mira's success had instead exposed his own questionable conduct to the entire pack. As the formal proceedings drew to a close, Mira felt the weight of the past week finally begin to lift from her shoulders. She had survived not only the physical and emotional trials on the training grounds, but now the far more treacherous battlefield of pack politics and quiet manipulation as well. Kane caught her eye across the hall, something warm and unmistakably proud crossing his features despite the formal setting. Whatever remained to be settled between them personally, one thing had become undeniably clear to the entire pack that afternoon. Mira Ashwood belonged here, fully and completely, and no amount of scheming would be enough to take that away from her. In the weeks that followed the council's dismissal of Victor Lane's challenge, the Blackthorn pack slowly settled into a new rhythm, one that felt steadier and more united than it had in years. Victor himself faded quietly from his previous position of influence among the trading council, the revelation of his unreported dealings costing him the respect he had spent years carefully building. Priya, freed from the weight of her father's ambitions, began quietly forging her own path within the pack, occasionally visiting Mira to speak honestly about the future she was only now beginning to imagine for herself. Colin's health continued to improve steadily, color returning fully to his cheeks, strength returning to his limbs, until he was able to walk the length of their family's home without growing winded. Watching her brother laugh freely again, watching her mother's shoulders finally relax after years of carrying quiet shame, gave Mira a sense of peace she had not known she was capable of feeling. But it was the changing relationship between herself and Kane that occupied the quiet corners of her mind most persistently in the days following the council meeting. He sought her out often now, no longer under the pretense of official pack business, but simply to talk, to walk together along the quiet paths near the stream, where they had first spoken honestly with one another before the second trial. Their conversations grew easier with each meeting, the careful distance that once existed between Alpha and Challenger slowly dissolving into something warmer, something neither of them had expected when this entire journey began. One evening, nearly a month after the trials had concluded, Kane found her at the edge of the training grounds, watching the sunset paint the sky in soft shades of orange and gold. "I have been thinking," he said, settling beside her on the low stone wall that bordered the field, "about what happens now." "What do you mean?" Mira asked, though something in his tone told her this conversation carried more weight than his usual evening visits. "You earned your place within this pack through the trials," Kane said carefully. "That much has been settled, thoroughly and beyond question, by the council itself. But what that place actually means, going forward, is something I find myself wanting to discuss with you directly, rather than simply allowing tradition to dictate the answer." Mira turned to face him fully, her heart beginning to quicken. "What are you asking?" Kane was quiet for a long moment, searching for the right words. "Every Omega who came before you, approached the trials, hoping to earn a position beside me, built on obligation, on tradition demanding it of us both. I do not want that kind of arrangement with you. I do not want you standing beside me simply because a set of trials determined you had earned the right to." "Then what do you want?" Mira asked softly. "I want you to choose it," Kane said, echoing the same words he had offered her before the final trial, though this time, the meaning behind them ran far deeper. "Not because tradition demands it, not because of what your success in the trials has earned you, but because it is genuinely what you want for your own future." Mira studied him for a long moment, thinking of everything the past month had brought her way. The fear that had driven her into that hall demanding the challenge, the exhaustion of enduring pressure no one believed she could withstand, the vulnerability of speaking painful truths in front of an entire crowd, the quiet dignity of choosing submission on her own terms rather than having it forced upon her, and now, this final, most important choice of all, offered to her freely, rather than demanded by circumstance. "I did not begin this journey expecting to feel anything for you beyond respect, earned through necessity," Mira said honestly. "But somewhere between that first trial and now, something changed. You did not simply test my strength. You saw me, in a way almost no one within this pack ever bothered to before, and you gave me choices where tradition demanded you take them away instead." She reached for his hand, holding it steadily in her own. "So yes, I choose this. Not because of the trials, not because of tradition, but because of everything I have come to know about you through the course of surviving them." Kane's expression softened into something Mira had never seen from him before. Warmth entirely unguarded, relief evident in every line of his features. He raised their joined hands gently, pressing a soft kiss against the back of hers, a gesture far quieter and more meaningful than any formal declaration the pack's traditions might have demanded of them. "Then let the entire pack know," he said, "that the quiet Omega, everyone once dismissed, has not simply survived the challenge. She has changed what it means, permanently, for every Omega who comes after her." Word spread quickly through the Blackthorn pack in the days that followed, carried not through rumor or scandal this time, but through genuine celebration. The formal announcement, made before the entire gathered pack in the Great Hall, was met with an outpouring of support that surprised even Mira herself. proof of how far both her own standing and the pack's understanding of its oldest traditions had shifted since the night she first walked through those doors, demanding a chance no one believed she deserved. Doran, presiding over the announcement with visible pride, addressed the crowd warmly. Let this stand as a reminder to every generation that follows. Strength does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, it walks quietly among us for years, waiting only for the moment it is finally given the chance to be seen. Ilara stood near the front of the crowd, beaming with unmistakable pride at her closest friend's transformation, from an overlooked healer's daughter into someone the entire pack now recognized and respected. Colin and their mother stood nearby as well, tears of genuine joy shining in both their eyes as they watched Mira, radiant and steady, standing confidently beside the Alpha who had once been told no Omega could survive his challenge. As the celebration continued long into the evening, Mira found a quiet moment to step outside the hall, needing a breath of cool evening air after the overwhelming warmth of the day's events. Kane followed shortly after, finding her exactly where he somehow always seemed to know she would be, near the edge of the training grounds where everything between them had truly begun. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked quietly, standing beside her, as they watched the stars begin to emerge over the pack's territory. Mira considered the question honestly before answering. None. Every trial, every difficult moment, every fear I had to overcome, led me exactly here. I would not change a single part of it, even knowing everything it would cost me along the way. Kane reached for her hand once more, holding it gently as they stood together beneath the darkening sky. Then let us build whatever comes next together, exactly the way we chose to begin it. Honestly and on our own terms. Mira smiled, leaning slightly into his side as the last light of day faded fully into night. The quiet Omega, who once hid in the shadows of a pack that barely acknowledged her existence, had not only survived the impossible challenge everyone believed would break her, she had transformed it into something entirely new, proving, beyond any doubt, that true strength had never required cruelty to be recognized, and that sometimes, the quietest among us carry the deepest resolve of all.